Voices in the dark. 10-year-old Ben sat cross-legged on the thin mattress of the family's camper, the faint glow of a flashlight his only comfort. Outside, the woods were silent, the kind of quiet that felt alive, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. Ben's older brother, Matt, had teased him earlier, saying, "Skinwalkers are real out here, you know. They can look like anyone, even me." Ben had laughed it off, but now, every creak of the camper and rustle outside made his skin crawl. He was about to curl under his sleeping bag when he heard it. Tap, tap. Ben's head snapped toward the tiny window above his bunk. There, in the faint moonlight, was Matt's face. "Ben," the voice whispered, low and urgent. "Ben, open the door. I need you." Ben froze. "Matt, what are you doing out there?" "Shoo, don't wake Mom and Dad." Matt hissed, his breath fogging the glass. "I need your help. Something's wrong with the tent zipper. I can't get back in." Ben frowned. Matt and their parents were supposed to be asleep in the back of the camper. But the voice, it was definitely Matt's. "I'll get Dad," Ben said, but Matt's voice cut him off, sharper this time. "No, don't wake them. Just come outside, Ben. Please." Ben hesitated, heart pounding. "Why can't you fix it yourself? You're older." Matt's face tilted oddly, too far to one side, as if his neck couldn't quite hold the weight. His eyes gleamed faintly in the dark. "Ben, I need you. Now." The way he said it sent a shiver down Ben's spine. He reached for the door handle, unsure when... "Ben!" The door to the back room slammed open, and Matt stormed out, his face twisted with groggy irritation. "What the heck are you doing? You woke me up." Ben turned, his blood running cold. Matt was here. Slowly, his eyes moved back to the window. The thing outside was still there, but now its face was no longer quite Matt's. The features were too sharp, the grin too wide, the teeth too long. "Come outside," it said again, its voice still Matt's but stretched like a broken record. "Come outside and help me, Benny." Ben screamed. Matt rushed to the window, but by the time he got there, the thing was gone. Just the trees swaying gently in the wind. The two brothers didn't sleep that night. They stayed huddled together, watching the window, listening as something circled the camper. And somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, the voice came again. "Benny, let me in."
Twisted Shadows. Claire stepped onto the frost-covered grass, flashlight in hand, her breath misting in the frigid night air. The stars above her farm were swallowed by thick clouds, leaving the world around her pitch black, except for the narrow beam of light she held. "Rusty," she called, her voice trembling. Her dog had darted out an hour ago, chasing something into the fields. It wasn't like him to stay gone this long. Her boots crunched against the ground as she wandered farther from the farmhouse. The night felt heavier than usual, the silence pressing down on her ears like a weight. "Rusty, come here, boy," she shouted again. Then she saw them, two faint points of light glowing in the distance, low to the ground, reflecting her flashlight. Rusty's eyes. Relief washed over her. "Rusty," she called, quickening her pace. The dog stood still in the semi-darkness, his outline barely visible. "There you are. You scared me to death." She knelt beside him, reaching out to pet his head. The fur was damp and cold, but she didn't think much of it. He'd probably run through a puddle. But then Rusty moved. His body convulsed violently, the sound of cracking bones ripping through the silence. His spine seemed to stretch unnaturally, the fur rippling as if something was trying to burst out from underneath. His limbs twisted in impossible angles, his head jerking back and forth as guttural. Choking sounds escaped his throat. "Rusty," Claire whispered, frozen in place. Her hand hovered in the air as the creature let out a distorted growl that sounded more human than canine. and then it smiled. Rusty's face twisted into something alien, his jaw elongating, teeth too large for his mouth. The glowing eyes stared into hers as the grotesque figure began to crawl toward her, its legs bending the wrong way. "Claire." The thing spoke. Its voice was garbled, a sick mimicry of her own. "Come with me," it said, its grin splitting wider, exposing rows of jagged teeth. Claire stumbled backward, dropping her flashlight. Panic gripped her as she scrambled to her feet, the beam of light catching the creature for a brief moment. It wasn't Rusty. It wasn't even a dog. The thing's flesh rippled like water, shifting into grotesque shapes as it lunged toward her. Then, from the darkness behind her, she heard it barking. The real Rusty. She turned her head, and there he was, sprinting toward her from the direction of the barn, his bark sharp and urgent. The creature hissed, retreating slightly, its body contorting as if it was unsure of its shape. Rusty barreled between Claire and the thing, teeth bared, growling in a way she'd never heard before. The creature let out a piercing shriek, a sound that didn't belong in this world, before dropping to all fours and slithering back into the darkness of the fields. Claire grabbed Rusty, clutching him tightly as tears streamed down her face. She didn't dare look back as she ran toward the farmhouse, Rusty by her side, his growls echoing into the night. Inside, she locked the doors and collapsed on the floor, holding her trembling dog close. But outside, in the vast emptiness of the farm, something moved. And when she glanced out the window, two glowing eyes stared back at her from the edge of the fields. The same smile, too wide, etched into the darkness.
Voices in the pines. The sun was dipping low behind the jagged mountains of rural Arizona, casting long shadows over the pine trees that framed the family's country house. 17-year-old Ethan sat by the window, absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone. Outside, his mother was in the yard, humming softly as she collected herbs and grass for her evening remedies. "Don't wander too far," he called through the window, not bothering to look up. "I won't," she replied, her voice warm and familiar. But when he finally glanced outside again, she was gone. At first, Ethan wasn't worried. She often strolled into the woods at the edge of their property to gather wild plants. But as the minutes ticked by, unease began to creep in. The sky was darker now, streaked with deep purples and reds, and the woods had taken on an ominous stillness. He cracked open the window and called out, "Mom? Are you coming back?" Silence. Then faintly her voice drifted from the woods. "Ethan." It was soft, almost musical, but something about it made his skin crawl. He pressed his face closer to the window, trying to spot her among the trees. "Mom!" he shouted again. "Ethan, come here!" The voice came again, louder this time, but wrong, like it was being forced through clenched teeth. His pulse quickened. "Where are you?" The voice didn't answer. It just repeated his name, over and over, each time more distorted, the tone climbing into an unnatural pitch. He grabbed a flashlight and hesitated at the back door, peering into the darkening forest. And then he saw her. His mother emerged from the trees, her figure backlit by the dim twilight. She was waving to him, her movements stiff and awkward. But as he opened the door, his heart stopped. Another figure appeared from the woods, further down the tree line, and another. 3 identical versions of his mother were stepping out of the shadows, each moving with the same unsettling gait. "Ethan!" they called in unison, their voices overlapping like a broken choir. "Come to me, honey." He stumbled backward, slamming the door shut and locking it. His hands trembled as he grabbed his phone, desperately dialing his mother's number. It rang once, twice. "Ethan," a voice answered. Her voice. But it was the same warped tone from the forest. The line went dead. The figures were closer now, circling the house. He could hear their footsteps crunching on the gravel outside, the eerie sound of their voices drifting through the thin walls. "Let us in, Ethan." He raced to the window and peered out. One of the figures was directly beneath it, staring up at him. Its face was too perfect, too smooth like a mask. And then it smiled, a grotesque grin that stretched far beyond human capability, revealing rows of jagged yellow teeth. Behind him, the back door rattled violently. The others were trying to get inside. "Ethan!" He grabbed a kitchen knife, his heart pounding as the walls seemed to close in around him. The voices grew louder, filling every corner of the house. Then a sharp knock came from the front door. "Ethan," his mother's voice said, this time sounding real. "Sweetheart, it's me. Open the door." He froze, knife shaking in his grip. "Mom?" he whispered. "Yes, honey. It's okay now. Open the door." But through the window, he could still see the figures outside, grinning up at him. Tears streamed down his face as the knocking grew more insistent. "Open the door, Ethan," the voice said again, but now it sounded different, desperate, angry. "Open the door!" The lights flickered and the room was plunged into darkness. The last thing Ethan saw before everything went black was a pair of glowing eyes staring at him from every window. And then he collapsed.
The Beast of the Forgotten Road. I never believed in skinwalkers. Not really. Sure, I'd heard the stories growing up in rural Arizona. Whispers around campfires and warning tales passed down by the elders. But I always thought they were just folklore. That was until one night when everything changed. It was late, and I was driving back to my cabin after a long day of hiking. The sun had long set, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the desert landscape. The road I was on was desolate, winding through stretches of prickly desert scrub and jagged rocks. My headlights barely pierced the darkness, but I was used to this place. Nothing to fear, right? I thought that until I saw it. At first, it was just a shape at the edge of the road, a figure standing still in the night, its eyes reflecting the light from my headlights. I slowed the truck, squinting to make out the details. The figure didn't move. It just stood there unnaturally still. Then it started walking toward me, its steps slow and deliberate. I froze. It looked human, at least from a distance, but something felt off. The way it moved didn't seem right, like it was imitating the motion of a person but wasn't quite pulling it off. I reached for my phone, ready to call 911, but as I checked the signal, I realized there was none. My stomach dropped. The figure was now close enough for me to see clearly. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, tall with long matted hair. His skin was pale, almost ashen, and his face was gaunt, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. But it wasn't just his appearance that made me uneasy. It was his eyes, dark, empty pits. They seemed to swallow the light. Then it happened. The man, suddenly dropped to all fours like some kind of animal. Its movements became jerky and unnatural, like a predator in the middle of a hunt. And that's when I saw it clearly. Its legs, once human, began to twist and elongate, turning into something grotesque and wrong. Bones cracked, skin stretched, and within seconds it was no longer a man. It was something else, a creature, a beast that should not exist in this world. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the tires screeching as I sped down the road, heart racing. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw it. It was running after me on all fours, faster than any human should be able to move. The thing's face was no longer human. Its features had warped into something monstrous, its mouth too wide, filled with teeth that didn't belong in any living creature. I could hear its breathing, heavy and labored, as it kept pace with my truck. It was gaining on me. In a panic, I swerved, almost losing control, and the truck's headlights briefly illuminated the road ahead. For a split second, I saw the thing again, not running, but standing in the middle of the road. It was watching me, those empty eyes piercing through the night. And in that instant, I saw its hands, long, twisted, clawed hands, raised, as if beckoning me. I didn't wait. I floored the accelerator, slamming through the desert night, praying that I would make it to the safety of the cabin. When I finally arrived, I bolted the doors, locking every window. couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop shaking. The sound of its breath haunted me in the silence, its presence still lingering in the air like a curse. I tried to tell myself it was just a figment of my imagination, that I had been seeing things, but deep down, I knew the truth. The legends were real. Skinwalkers weren't just stories. They were out there, and they were hunting. Now every night I hear it, soft scratching at my window, the low, guttural growl outside my door. I know it's waiting, and I know the next time I leave this cabin, I may not come back. I'm not sure what it wants, but I have a feeling it's not letting me go without a fight.